Hold on to your butts.
Da-da-da. You were saying?
Welcome to episode 87 of the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast. Tonight, I am joined by the guy who has at least one thing in common with General John Hunt Morgan, and that is being a Freemason. I am his co-host, Mary, who, for obvious reasons, I am not a Freemason, but one day, I hope to be part of the Order of the Eastern Star. So, welcome, Darren. How are you?
Absolutely blackball you on that vote, but anyway, I'm doing pretty good. How you doing?
You'd blackball me?
Of course, I wouldn't, as far as you know. So what's going on with that? What's going on today?
Well, not too much. We're getting into one of our episodes, which we are focusing on a personality from the Civil War, which is pretty cool. We've been very battle heavy lately, so it's good to get back into that. How are you?
Yeah, it definitely is. Oh, I'm doing fantastic. Fantastic. So I'm definitely looking forward to this one. I thought we were going to do this one last week, but I got shoved to the side for Aldi, which I'm glad we did that because that was a good one too. But I'm very excited to talk about this one. Okay. Well, how are you?
Good. Anyway, I would be a shitty co-host if I didn't ask you, what are you drinking and from what mug? Although,
oh my God, thanks for asking, Mary. I'm drinking, it's called Zeus, King of Gods, and I'm drinking out of my Freemason mug because, as you said, this is an episode involving a guy who is a Freemason. So now, since I will return the favor to you, what are you drinking?
I am drinking Northern Lights Hazy IPA by Bob Cajun Brewing Company. And I chose Northern Lights because the guy we're going to be talking about, John Hunt Morgan, he is allegedly the guy that made it into like the most northern invasion into the Union. And that was in Ohio. I am drinking it out of my first Kansas colored volunteer infantry mug, which the awesome John LaRoe sent us. And I'm drinking out of that because we just had Juneteenth recently. So, and I have no cavalry related or John Hunt Morgan mugs or Freemason mugs. So I thought that was the next best thing to go with, which was Juneteenth. So that's what I'm doing.
Okay. So not St. Albans though, furthest north, it's Ohio. We'll roll.
Okay, I guess St. Albans then. I don't know. I think it was it was uniformed. Okay, we're gonna get hit over that now.
Oh, no, you will. I'm going to sit back here. As usual, I agree with everybody. So as you were saying, Mary, we've been talking horses and battles lately. And so we decided we're going to try to stay in the saddle, for this episode again. And tonight we're going to talk about one of the more colorful characters in the Civil War, a guy they called the Thunderbolt of the Confederacy. That, of course, being the infamous rebel cavalier from Kentucky, John Hunt Morgan.
He's born in Huntsville, Alabama, but he identifies with his mother's home state of Kentucky.
Most people know him from that famous raid. We're going to talk a little about that. That scared the crap out of people in Indiana and Ohio. But his life really is right out of a movie. And we're going to talk about that, from his raid to his capture, from his escape from that Ohio jail to his death. John Hunt Morgan is a one-of-a-type guy that is such a fascinating study, right? He's fearless, he's tough, but he's also sympathetic and very kind to his men and to the Union men. He took his responsibilities of Freemasonry, that, as you mentioned, very, very seriously, but he drove the Union generals crazy with his brashness. And as much attention as Jeb Stuart gets, Morgan was the very image of a Southern cavalier. He always wore that spotless uniform, wore those boots high, and he was worshipped in the South through songs and stories. I mean, he's somebody who, when you think about a cavalier, John Hunt Morgan quickly should come to mind.
A bit about his early life. His father was he owned land and business in Kentucky eventually because they had to move from Alabama. When in 1831 his father lost their home there, so they moved to Lexington, where his father would manage his father-in-law's large farms. His father passes away, and then his mother really starts helping Morgan with his business ventures and all that. He attends Transylvania College for 2 years, and he's suspended in 1844 for dueling with one of his fraternity brothers. Morgan was actually part of a fraternity there. I think it's called the Adelphi Society, and he got into a duel one day, and the college apparently suspended him. And there's this one biography about Morgan, which is a little bit, I want to say, lost cause, where it says Morgan had the option to go back, but he just chose not to, kind of thing, because that was kind of the Southern way to do things, and he wanted to prove himself. He's the brother-in-law of A.P. Hill and Basil W. Duke. We're going to be hearing more about Duke in this episode because he's actually one of Morgan's men. Duke is an officer in the Confederate States Army. He's Morgan's second in command, and he will write a popular account of Morgan's most famous raid. as well.
Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned his family. He's also the grandson of a John Wesley Hunt, who was a
Hmm.
local millionaire who founded Lexington, Kentucky, of all things. He descended from a Revolutionary War hero, a guy named Daniel Morgan. You mentioned, Transylvania College, and it's funny, there's a lot of Civil War people who went there. Obviously Jefferson Davis
Yeah.
went there, John C. Breckinridge went there, Bleriot, Preston Blair went there, and also I don't know if you know this, Mary, but the Star of Deliverance, the great Ned Beatty went there. I don't
Hmm.
know if you know that. So it's a school. It's kind of funny, but you mentioned that he had himself in some trouble with some dueling. But a couple of years later, he would become a Freemason. Okay. And this is going to be in the Davies Lodge, number 22 in Lexington, Kentucky. He's going to take those values for the rest of his life. We'll talk about that off and on. It's right around this time, probably 1846 or so, when he is going to sign up with one of his brothers, Calvin Morgan, as well as his uncle Alexander in the army. Now, he's going to join the cavalry right out of the war with Mexico. It's right when the war is kind of getting underway. He joins this. John Morgan, he really took to that role pretty quickly, and he rose to the rank of lieutenant. In Mexico, he fought in the Battle of Buena Vista, and he would see his first combat. The war ended in less than 2 years, and Morgan kind of found himself kind of looking for something to do back in Kentucky again, relived his life, and I think he finally got a taste of what he wanted to do, but then suddenly it was kind of over. So he kind of did what most people do. He sat around, he drank, he gambled, he
Hmm.
tried his luck with the ladies. He
Yeah,
did
he
everything.
enjoyed the ladies.
He certainly did. He also got involved in the slave trade, and he
Hmm.
became a manufacturer of hemp. Okay, so there
Yep.
you go.
Well,
Okay,
that was one of the
um,
most, like, it was one of the more prominent crops in the area of Kentucky that he lived in.
yeah, and he is going to settle down a little bit. He's going to meet a woman named Rebecca Bruce, the sister of his business partner, and of course, they soon got married. In 1853, Rebecca's going to get pregnant, but she's going to lose the baby at birth. It was stillborn, and she's going to come down with this weird affliction called milk leg,
Yeah, it's
which is
like,
basically like a blood clot in the vein, but it led to her losing her leg.
and they grew really distant after that. And Morgan is a gambler and a womanizer, so I don't think that kind of helped his case with his wife either. And he apparently had a son with one of his slaves, and the son's name was Sidney Morgan.
We'll talk about him later on too, because it's kind of ironic thing with him how that plays itself
Hmm.
out. Through most of the businessman at this time of his life, John Morgan. He still has that itch to join the military. He had that 2 year taste in
Yep.
Mexico, and this is when those political tensions in Kentucky were really kind of spilling over secession and slavery. He's gonna create his own independent company of infantry called the Lexington Rifles. Right. The thing about him is interesting because Morgan's devotion was 100% of the South. I mean, 100%.
Hmm.
But when talk of secession came up in war, he wasn't really kind of with it. He was kind of
No.
neutral. He definitely remained neutral overall, as did Kentucky. He probably did not share the opinion of his governor, the famous Beriah Egg McGoffin, we've talked about many, many
McMuffin?
times, because he thought that attitude, his attitude should stay with the South. But he's going to write his brother, actually, his brother Thomas, soon after Abraham Lincoln married the president. He's going to get elected. And he's going to write, "Our state will not, I hope, secede. And I have no doubt but Lincoln will make a good president. At least we ought to give him a shot. And then if he commits some overt acts, all the South will be a unit." So what is he saying here? Morgan's saying, well, we don't like him, but we have to get around him, which is kind of the mature attitude you have.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the attitude Kentucky had. Like, I think, just from the episodes that we've done about Kentucky before, like we had looked at some of the how things were at secession in that state, and it was, it was very divided. But you had people like Morgan who did own slaves, but they were like, yeah, we don't want to secede. We want things to keep going how they are. So there are people like Morgan in that state, and that's why it's so divided. It's a very strange state in that regard.
But unfortunately, that overt act that Morgan was kind of saying, as long as he doesn't do it, that does happen though,
Hmm.
because that overt act is going to
Yep.
happen when he's going to change his mind. This is going to be when his hometown of Kentucky is going to be occupied by federal troops. That was kind of the line in the sand. He's like, the hell with this. At that point, Morgan's going to close his business. He's going to fly a Confederate flag from his factory. He's going to gather those Lexington Rifles, and they all went to Bowling Green, which is like a secession capital, right?
Hmm.
And they all signed up with the Confederate Army. Now, even before they officially joined the Army, Morgan and his raiders there are going to quickly kind of become a cramp in the dick of those Union occupiers,
They
right?
are. Yep.
Right. I mean, at this point, he's a captain, and Morgan's going to lead nightly raids into Union lines. He's going to burn bridges.
Yeah.
destroy railroads, and just cause overall mayhem. The Beetlejuice stuff we talked about.
Yep.
Now what's funny is John Morgan, and he went by John Morgan. The hunt came later,
Mhm.
but he went by John Morgan. He quickly gained a strong reputation in the South already, and he had that knack of terrorizing those federal troops riding back to Bowling Green. So he's already kind of getting a reputation as someone who the South is kind of rallying around as one of their own, who's
Mhm.
just kicking ass and they just love it.
Well, he
You
seems like
know,
the typical Southern guy, like these, that it talks a lot, like just this Southern gentleman thing. It seems like Morgan has that, he knows how to ride a horse. He knows how to shoot a rifle. When he was growing up, like he was always out on horses. He was always doing, hunting, doing target practice. So he had all that you would expect of a cavalry guy. But you made a remark that he's like the poor man's Jeb Stuart, right? He's not riding around with a feather in his hat. Sorry, Jeb Stuart fans, but a diva, right? He is just this grassroots individual who I think the people of Kentucky and people who knew about him could relate to in that way.
right? Absolutely. After Bowling Green is going to get captured by the Union, Morgan goes into Tennessee where he's going to raise that Second Kentucky Cavalry, which of course he'll be the colonel of. In early 1862, within a week after that, he's going to find himself fighting at the Battle of Shiloh, Mary. Perhaps
He
you've heard of
is.
that one. At Shiloh, Morgan's Second Kentucky is going to be attached to Robert Traboo's First Infantry
Mhm.
in that reserve corps commanded by John C. Breckinridge, and he'll have some success there.
Yeah, he will. So it's during the retreat that Morgan tries to go after McClernand's retreating troops. He's attacking on the orders of General Hardee. He gets attacked by the Federals, and Morgan just orders his troops to charge. They go in after the Federals into the woods, and they lose because it's the woods. They're going to lose all their formation. They still manage to put up quite a fight, and this is kind of the prequel to what we're going to see on Morgan's raid. Right, these guys that are pretty hard fighting men. Morgan's men don't falter. And the fighting is I can only describe it as a clusterfuck. Morgan's men are basically hacking and slashing at the Federals. They're using pistols, shotguns, bayonets, whatever they have.
Tridents.
Yeah, hockey sticks, if you're from
Probably
Canada.
should. It seems like everything he does is being noticed by the Southern press, right? He's getting that notoriety. He led a full cavalry charge of that regiment, like you said, right into the teeth of that Union army. He's brash, he's flashy, he's not arrogant, it seems, but he just,
No.
like your point is a good point. The people just relate to him for
Yep.
whatever reason. After Shiloh, it's going to be that preview of things to come. We got to talk about that with now Colonel Morgan and his 900 men going that 3-week raid into Kentucky, and showed that he had that cocky style to kind of go along with the balls.
Yep.
Kind of. He just kind
Nice.
of did. Well, he did though, and as he did it, he got more and more notoriety. That 3-week raid, this is kind of like the baby raid compared to the big one he's going to do later.
Yeah, this is
He's
like
gonna
kind of if you want to compare it to something in the Union, it's like Sherman's Meridian campaign, which is small scale march to the sea. This is Morgan getting ready for his big raid.
Yeah, so this is a 3-week raid that's going to go into the Savannah of General Don Carlos Buell of his army. It's going to net over 1,000 captured Union men and horses, as well as a shit ton of destroyed supplies. The real goal, though, was the fear that Morgan sent throughout Kentucky that resonated all the way to Washington.
Yep.
So it created a long pucker effect, okay? Morgan's men rode 500 miles in his 14 days. Not only did he destroy supplies, his men robbed banks, they looted the Food King and other stores. Even from those that were owned by Confederate sympathizers, they raided those stores too. Despite his effort to maintain his role as that chivalrous Confederate officer and cavalier, his men grew more and more hostile with the destruction as it went. It got more and more stupid. In the North, the press vilified Morgan, calling him one of the greatest scoundrels that ever went unhung, they called him.
Wow.
Okay. Well,
And I kind of wonder how that made Jeb Stuart feel, because there was one historian that noted that Morgan's feat in many ways surpassed Jeb Stuart's celebrated ride around McClellan. So you got to wonder if Jeb Stuart's thinking like, who is this guy? But to your point with what this did, in the North and in the South, especially the North for like morale and kind of that pucker effect. I'm pretty sure Morgan probably knew about that. And I think as we're going to see, that is somewhat of what he used and was thinking of in the big raid that he does, and why he makes the decisions that he does in that raid.
Well, Stuart had the military background. He was, for the Lee going back way back.
Yeah.
Morgan came out of nowhere.
Exactly.
He was, as much as he was vilified in the Northern press, he was glorified, like I mentioned before, in the Southern press.
Yep.
But the one thing that he did, the upper levels of that rebel military started to get a little itchy about him, and they
Hmm.
started to grow because of the lack of discipline in his men.
Yeah.
But his raid did prove to them that he and his men had spirit. That's kind of what he did. If you remember, we did the previous battle of episode of Perryville.
Yep.
Finch, I don't know. You probably thought this long ago. You probably long forgot about that right now.
It's okay.
The relative ease Morgan had rolling into Kentucky set the stage of old friend Braxton Bragg's and Edmund Kirby's offensive into that state later in the year. Remember how he got there easy and they said, well, if he can do it, we can do it, right?
Yep.
When he captured the town of Lexington, he captured the Kentucky town of Somerset, okay? That town just south of Lexington and just north of the Tennessee border. This is what I love about Morgan, okay, is the stones. He captures them. He sends 3 messages, okay, which is the 19th century version of trash talk. He just does, okay. So after he captures this town of Somerset, he sits down. The first one he writes is a guy named George Prentice, okay. George Prentice was the editor of the Louisville Journal and a strong proponent of keeping Kentucky neutral and out of the fight. So on July 22nd, 1862, John Morgan's going to write to him, good morning, George. I'm quietly watching the complete destruction of all of Uncle Sam's property in this little burg. I regret exceedingly that this is the last that shall come under my supervision on this route. I expect in a short time to pay you a visit and wish to know if you will be at home. All is well in Dixie, your friend John Morgan.
Wow.
Okay. But wait, there's more. Okay. He writes a second letter. Okay. Same time to a guy named Jeremiah Boyle. Now, this is the Union military governor of Kentucky. So he's in a right mood. He's going to write, good morning, Jerry, said to Jeremiah. This telegraph is a great institution. You should destroy it, as it keeps you too well posted. My friend Ellsworth has all your dispatches since the 10th of July on file. Do you wish copies? Your friend, John Morgan.
Oh my God. So he's talking about Lightning Ellsworth, who is like his telegraph
Right.
boy.
So he's sitting there saying, we got all your stuff. If you want copies, you can have them. We got them, okay? The third one is to George Washington Dunlop. He's a pro-union U.S. rep from Kentucky. And he's going to write, Honorable George Dunlop just completed my tour through Kentucky, captured 17 cities, destroyed millions of dollars worth of Union property, passed through your country, but regret not seeing you. We paroled 1,500 rebel prisoners, your friend, John Morgan. So he's basically saying stuff he did, and he's giving him the finger saying, hey, look what I did.
Yeah.
And he's sending the letters, which is fantastic when
That
you really
is
think
amazing.
about it.
Like, is there reports of like Jeb Stuart doing anything like that?
I have no idea. But what he's doing, he's kind of setting this cult of personality.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, like these movies, they leave the villain leaves the calling card, the Joker or something like that. He's like, look what I did. And just the way he addresses them is hilarious. Morgan's personality is going to make him extremely popular with his own men, promising them action and loot and fun. Because you can only imagine how it must have been.
Well, he's much like, you look at pictures of him, he's this kind of gruff looking guy who clearly would have fit in with his men, and I think that's why he was so popular. People can relate to him. They probably looked at him and like, yeah, he looks like somebody, I would see walking down the street, not dressed up all fancy, right?
It was a big game to him. He was generous, even generous to the Union men he caught.
Yeah.
When he caught them, he would simply disarm them and parole them.
Yeah.
It was a big deal. I got you. Okay, fine, now go. That's all it was. It was just a lot of fun. He was also, like we said, very fond of the women. Okay, as you can imagine, he liked to charm them. Even the wives of Union soldiers. Now, there was this one time he stopped a train and he captured a bunch of Union troops while they were riding with their wives on this train, okay? Here's what he does. He captures them, but then he promises their wives not to worry, as they will not be harmed. But then you know what he does? He takes off his white gloves and offers his hand to all of them so they can kiss it to thank him for not hurting their husbands.
Oh
so he goes right down the
God.
train. That's what he does. So sometimes you just gotta tip your hat to these people.
Jesus.
But that's what he does, right? So
wow.
So this first little raid he does it all. He cuts the telegraph lines. He destroys railroads. He sends fake messages to the Union to confuse them. At times, Morgan's men they'd pretend to be Union troopers just to get intel from their pursuers. They were really, really good, right? In the fall when Bragg did his offensive, which led to that draw at Perryville we talked about, which spelled really the end of the hopes of capturing Kentucky for the Confederacy. Morgan's effort still was propped by the Southern press. They all chanted Morgan victorious. That's what they said when they pushed their Southern papers. This is despite Bragg's failure. So you can see now, no matter what happens, Morgan was going to get credit for the good he did. And what the press loved about John Hunt Morgan was his balls and his flash, which the
Yeah.
South described as romantic and daring feats of the days of knighthood and chivalry.
He's the
Right?
perfect guy
That's
to
how they
write
saw
up.
it.
He's the perfect guy to write about for boosting morale and all that. Like to say, like, look what this guy's doing. Look how he's kind of humiliating the Union here. Like, look what we
Oh,
can
he
do.
was. He does sort of settle down, though. Morgan
Yep.
is famous in the South by now. He's a superstar. He's a rock star, right? Everybody knows who he is. And he was still famous with the ladies. But one woman who caught his eye was a woman named Maddie Reddy, the daughter of a former Tennessee
Hmm.
Congressman Charles Reddy Jr. Okay. Now, this is a funny story, too. Reddy Jr. is going to quit his position when Tennessee seceded. Now, Congressman Reddy wanted the rebel Cavalier to marry his daughter early in 1862 when he met Morgan. So he sends a message to his daughter, who recently turned down a marriage proposal from a guy named an Illinois congressman named Samuel Marshall. And the congressman messages the daughter through a slave and says, "The famous Captain Morgan is coming. Tell Maddie that Captain Morgan is a widower and a little sad. I want her to sing for him." What a pimp. He's pimping off his
He's
daughter
pimping,
to
and
John Hunt
because
Morgan is what he's doing.
and the widower thing is because his first wife had passed away on July the 21st, 1861.
The one with the milk leg.
Yeah.
So she's going to die. So he's going to do that. Morgan and Maddie, okay, they met, and it didn't take long until they were ready to marry. Right? and this was like the big social event of the season, right?
Yeah.
And it was scheduled for December of 1862 at Reddy Mansion, not far from Murfreesboro, Tennessee, which is a few weeks for a battle that was about to happen down there,
a few
right?
weeks before Stones River. We actually talked about this wedding in our Stones River episode because all the Confederate officers went to it except one. Patrick Claiborne did not go to it, even though Hardee was like, "You should come to it," and he's like, "Nah, I'm gonna stay back."
Oh, it's pretty funny. And the thing about it is, you mentioned the kindness that Morgan showed. Okay, now what happens is he's going to show this towards his men at his wedding. Now, while this wedding's going on, you mentioned all the rebel officers who were there. Okay, they're going to have to place soldiers around the mansion to guard this. Okay, because this will be a big target. There's a war going on. Stones River is right on the corner, and Rosecrans. There's a lot going on right in that area. Okay. During the wedding, it's December. Okay, it's cold. The soldiers on guard duty are huddled around a fire. They're kind of miserable. Although it was cold, okay, they were still thought it was cool. They were guarding the thunderbolt of the Confederacy's wedding. All right. Well, this sucks, but at least we're doing this. While the wedding's going on, Morgan's going to send is going to send an officer, okay, from the 2nd Kentucky to bring the men guarding the wedding a platter full of wedding cake and jars of whiskey.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so he has a note, personal compliments of the general. So he's thanking him for guarding his wedding, which is pretty cool. The whiskey gets passed around, and one man, a guy named Andrew Campbell, remember that name, okay? Yeah. Andrew Campbell. He was happy to get the cake, but he still was pissed that he had to do this. He just grumbled. He wrote he quotes, "No more to me than I am to him," Campbell complained. Basically what he did. At that point, one of the officers present says, "That's because you never rode with Morgan. If you knew him, by God, you would salute his very hoof prints. So let's drink to his health." And Campbell kind of rolls his eyes and says, "Okay, fine. Here's to the bride then. And if I ever should meet Morgan, I will salute him or by God shake his hand." Okay, remember that story later. Okay, yeah. Despite all these misgivings from that rebel hierarchy, Braxton Bragg, for the most part, gave the okay for Morgan to take his men again into the North for another raid. Okay, this is the one that's going to go down as Morgan's raid. This is the big boy. Okay, and it's one that's going to be brash, and it's going to be launched on a much larger scale, and it's going to have much more of a military reason for it as well.
Yeah, and that's because at this time, so this is launched, spring, summer 1863, you have Vicksburg happening, you have Gettysburg, you have Tullahoma campaign. All this different stuff is happening as Morgan is doing this. And it's going to be the largest military campaign conducted in the state of Indiana during the Civil War, because that is going to be one of the states that Morgan goes to. But he's ordered by General Braxton Bragg, who's leading the Army of Tennessee. His plan was to draw Union cavalry north into Kentucky, hopefully impede the advance on Chattanooga by General Rosecrans and the Army of the Cumberland, and also try to draw Union troops away from the east. And when I read this. I thought of a parallel with the Union. This is exactly what Sherman was trying to do with his March to the Sea. He was trying to draw troops from the east, make them scared for their families, and draw them back south to desert from Lee's army.
Yeah,
Morgan
exactly.
and Sherman are doing similar things here.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing you got to remember, you just mentioned Grant's got his Vicksburg campaign going.
Yeah.
Lee's about to go into Pennsylvania. So if he can cause mayhem in the north, if he can piss off the Copperheads and get them going against the war still, but more important, if he can draw troops away from both of those armies, it's going to be a win-win. So Morgan's going to handpick 2,460 troopers, okay? And he was under strict orders by Braxton Bragg. Now, this is important.
And Joseph Wheeler, too. Wheeler's Joseph Wheeler's involved with this as well.
He's like, whatever the hell you do, he says, do not cross the Ohio River. He goes, you can do whatever you want, okay? But you got to stay. You cannot cross the river, okay? And Morgan's like, okay, well, we'll see about that.
Okay, Dad, as he's shaking his head.
So Morgan's raid is going to begin on June 11th, 1863, and those raiders are going to leave Sparta, Tennessee. And again, they're hoping to draw that diversion, draw troops away from the Army of Ohio, and maybe generate some pro-Southern support in that area as well. Now, though he had the orders from Bragg not to, to go into Kentucky again, Morgan really told his men, hey, I want to cross the Ohio freaking river, okay? Yep. He knows it's against orders. He wants to invade Indiana and Ohio and cause that mass freakout in the north. Now, he knew that Bragg gave him carte blanche to do whatever the hell he wanted in Tennessee and Kentucky. And, and next week, we're going to talk about the Tullahoma campaign, and how this raid kind of occurs on the eve of it and how it plays into it a little bit. On July 2nd, a couple of weeks later, if they're on the move. Now, this is the same day James Longstreet's doing his echelon attack at Gettysburg, okay?
Yep.
Morgan's raiders are going to ride into Kentucky, where they were welcomed as absolute heroes by the pro-Southern citizens, okay? They're going to get to a place called Burkesville, Kentucky, which is just north of the Tennessee border. And on July 4th, they're going to look to cross the Green River at a place called Tebbs Bend. Now, Tebbs Bend is going to be guarded by 5 companies, about 200 guys, okay? I should say a boot 200 guys, okay? Of the 25th Michigan, led by a guy named Colonel Orlando Moore. The Michigan men, they're guarding the Lebanon, Campbellsville, Columbia Turnpike, okay, which was the road that was a direct shot to Louisville and right along Morgan's path. Again, you're talking 2,000 guys now going up against about 200, okay? So the math doesn't work out too well for Moore and those Michigan men, right? It's like they're playing Ohio State again. I hate to say it, but it's kind of reality, right?
Hey, but Michigan won.
I know. I'm glad. Thank God for that. But is entrenched behind earthworks. And early in the morning on July 4th, those Federals are going to begin firing on Morgan's approaching guys, okay? Now, again, you're talking 4, maybe 5-to-1 odds against you, okay, if you're the Union guys, okay? So they really had no chance. What Morgan's going to do here is going to split his men and send about 400 troopers under Colonel Adam Johnson, who's going to basically run right through Moore's entrenchments. But Moore's guys are actually able to hold their own. They pushed these guys back about 8 times back and forth into the point where Morgan says, you know what, the hell with this. This is not friggin' worth it.
It's not worth it. And they call a truce so that Morgan can go collect his wounded and bury his dead. And you've got to wonder if just how hard fighting these Union guys are this early in the campaign, that it's because they've read about Morgan in the papers. They know who he is. And they're like, fuck, it doesn't matter if we're outnumbered. We are going to fight this guy, and we're going to fight it to the very last, because Moore and his men fight very, very hard here.
Yeah, I mean, Morgan's going to have to, even though he has those big number advantages, he's going to have to withdraw south, and he's going to have to cross the river at a place called Johnson Ford. So he's going to get across, though, of course. Now, this battle at Tebbs is going to be the beginning of a bunch of skirmishes that Morgan's going to have with these Federals. And he'll find himself on another one the very next day on July 5th, at this time in a place called Lebanon, Kentucky. And this is going to have a very personal effect on Morgan this time, this specific battle. Now, in Lebanon, Morgan is going to discover that there's a Federal garrison containing about 400 guys. This is from the 20th Kentucky under Colonel Charles Hanson, okay? And he's seeing Morgan's 2,400 guys, his men approaching, and he's going to try to set up some kind of defense, okay? Again, 2,400-ish versus about 400. Again, the numbers, don't play itself well for Hanson and his Kentucky guys. Now, Morgan's going to see this, and he's going to immediately demand Hanson's surrender and just avoid the shit show. He's like, listen, this is not going to end well. Just quit, please. Hanson's going to say no, and what's going to result is the Battle of Lebanon, okay? Hanson's men are going to get driven back through the town, and they're going to barricade themselves in like the Louisville and Nashville Railroad Depot, kind of like a big building they're going to force themselves into, right? Hanson, Kentucky Union guys are going to hold out for about 6 hours until the numbers just force them to surrender. The personal side for Morgan is this, is during this exchange back and forth with Hanson guys, his brother Thomas Morgan is going to be killed here.
Yeah.
And this is going to be a big personal loss for John.
He loses his brother here, which is just like Forrest loses his brother during a battle as well. But Morgan, it's war, whatever. He doesn't have time to mourn his brother. Like, he's basically got to keep going, right?
Well, he does. He's going to take the surrender of the garrison.
Yeah.
He's going to disarm them. He's going to parole them all immediately, like he tends to do. But they're going to set about 20 buildings on fire in Lebanon, just burn the thing down.
Gotta wonder if
Now,
that's he's
Morgan,
angry.
well, he's clearly dealing with the loss of his brother, and now he's on the Union Army's radar big time too, right? So he's going to keep the band moving towards Louisville. Now, they're going to bump heads with some Kentucky militia along the way, but they kept kind of riding, and they're aiming right for the Ohio River. Now, the one thing he did well in this raid was keeping the Union guessing of where he was going, right?
He did. He does so well with that. So when he's at Springfield, Morgan sends a small detachment north and east of Louisville just to try and confuse the Federals. This detachment crossed the Ohio River at 12 Mile Island, but they end up getting captured in Indiana before they could join Morgan again. But still, they're confusing him. The other thing he does is he's going to really screw with the Union by using this guy, Lightning Ellsworth, his telegrapher, to tap the telegraph lines and pretend to be the Union to send messages, including inflating the numbers of Morgan's men. He's like, they're as high as 7,000. Again, going back to the March to the Sea, this is something that Sherman did as well. That's why he had a right wing and a left wing, because he would think the right wing led by Howard is going to feint one way. The left wing led by Slocum is going to go the other way, because he wants to confuse the hell out of the Confederates. Morgan is doing something similar here to confuse the hell of the Union as to where he's going.
And George Ellsworth, he drives him crazy. He sends those fake troop numbers. He orders pizzas from the White House. He does all the pranks he does,
Could
right?
you imagine ordering pizzas? Better yet would be ordering a stripper. No, better yet would be ordering a stripper to the White House.
Oh, I'm sure Mary Lincoln.
Could you imagine?
Oh my God. I'm sure we got along with that pretty well. Old Julia Dent showing up. But he's going to drive the Union guys crazy, right? And by the way, Mary, guess where Ellsworth is from? He's from freaking Canada.
Is
Surprise, okay? So he probably stole some poor guy's Abner Small diary too, as a matter of fact. But that's another story. But he did. He's a Canadian, so there you go. Okay. Now, the other thing that's my God, whatever, is John Hunt Morgan. He really counted on the support of those Northern Copperheads we mentioned too, right?
Yep.
So he's going to send a spy named Thomas Hines, okay, across in that small entourage posing as federal troops. And you kind of hinted this a few minutes ago with this little raid they did, right? They want to go over and meet a guy named Dr. William Bowles, okay? Now, he was like the king of the Copperheads in Indiana. Yep. And they want to go over there and find out what the scoop is. Unfortunately for the Confederates under Hines, the spy, he quickly finds out that it isn't going to work out for him, and they have to run for their lives. And they're going to disappear for about a week until they could find their way back to Morgan. So whatever the hell happens, they just, they weren't having it. Hines is going to join them in the town of Brandenburg, Kentucky, right along the Ohio River. Now, in Brandenburg, Morgan's guys, they're going to hotwire a couple of boats here, okay?
Yeah.
The John B. McCombs and the Alice Dean. They're going to take those boats, and this is where the orders get broken, Mary. They go against direct orders of Bragg, and they're going to take those boats to cross the raiders across the Ohio River. So there you go.
Yeah, and they do that. But the Union they are ready for them because they've got gunboats there and everything else. They've got men waiting for them. But Morgan has still made things really difficult for them because the Federals don't really know where to go. And at this time, like, the Federals that they're facing are General Burnside, who's commanding the Department of the Ohio. He's based in Cincinnati. And then the naval gunboats on the Ohio River are commanded by Lieutenant Commander Leroy Fitch. And then Indiana Legions and the state militia is commanded by Governor Oliver P. Morton. And when he finds out Morgan is riding around, he manages to raise all these military companies throughout the south half of the state, takes them to rail by Morgan's likely target. So the Union is on to him big time. And you got to wonder if it's the press, right? Because the press is doing this.
They're reading about all his names in the papers. The Northern press is writing about him too. Governor Oliver Morton, he's going to put out that call for any able-bodied guys, and they're not going to get the best guys. I mean, most of the guys are fighting.
Yeah.
That home guard you mentioned under the command of Colonel Lewis Jordan, basically meet into the beginning of Morgan's troops on July 9th in the town of Corydon, okay?
Yep.
In Indiana. Needless to say, these Indiana guys get driven back, very, very quickly. They last about as long as a road beer in your car on a hot day. Not long, okay?
What, 30 seconds?
So they're going to go, if that, okay? Now Morgan's going to capture about 350 local militia before paroling them, which is, again, his custom. He demands cash from the town as a ransom. His men continue to move and torment towns such as DuPont, Salem, Versailles. Now, in DuPont on July 12th, this is a fun story too, okay? Morgan's going to burn many of the town's warehouses, and his men are going to steal 2,000 smoked hams.
Yeah, but that does not work out well for them.
Right, because they go bad, okay? And so because the hams start to attract flies, they start dropping the hams, okay? And what resulted in the trail of hams, guess what the Union Army did to follow where they were going? They just followed the hams.
It's like some screwed up version of Hansel and Gretel.
I guess they were bacon to get caught. But anyway, that's what they were doing, right? So they just follow the hams. Okay, we're following the hams, okay? And so by now the North is kind of in a big freak out, in a big mode. They're just going. The newspapers in the North and the South, they're following Morgan's raid with every move. You can only imagine Lincoln, General Burnside, like you said, he's in charge. Burnside's in charge of the Department of Ohio. He's going to put Cincinnati under martial law. He's going to order all the businesses closed as they kind of await for the arrival of Morgan. I mean, you could just see how the freakout was. So with Cincinnati in full freakout mode, the Southern press is loving it. They're all over Morgan. He was called the Gallant Kentucky Ranger. The Richmond papers cried, "We need more Morgans." I mean, he was doing everything, Yeah. Now, when Morgan continues to move to the northeast, he's going to arrive in the town of Versailles. Looks like Versailles, but it's pronounced Versailles. Okay, there you go.
Or
okay?
Versailles. So, I don't know.
Versailles, okay. Versailles. But who knows? But here Morgan's going to get pissed off when he finds out that some of his men have looted the Versailles Masonic Lodge and stole some of their stuff. I know what they stole. Okay, they stole stuff. When he found out about it, he punished the men and did what he did. He returned all the stolen stuff back to the lodge again. So again, he took Freemasonry very, very seriously with this. Even in the heat of battle, he said, nope, he got the stuff back. He imprisoned the men. He just, we ain't having that. So he took care of the lodge, right? It was on July 13th where the feds are right on his ass. Now Morgan's going to slide out of Indiana and into Ohio. You know what Morgan said when he entered Ohio? He said, "You'll never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy." That's what he said as he entered Ohio. That's what he did. That's
amazing.
No, yeah, he's exactly what he said. It's exactly what he said when he stood there and looked over and saw Ohio, okay? Now, when the men got into Ohio, they continued to do what they did. They destroyed railroads and bridges, the usual stuff, probably knowing that Cincinnati was fortified to the point that the only thing that could beat that town was probably the LA Rams at that point, realistically.
Whoa.
Morgan, well, it's true, though. Morgan chose, instead of hitting Cincinnati, to go around it, okay? And that's what he does. He continues to move east, looking to cross into now West Virginia. Okay, yeah. It's Virginia, but then it was West Virginia now, but it was Virginia back then. And the plan here is he wants to connect with Lee's guys. That's ultimately what he wants to do, right? Just north of Ravenswood, again in modern day West Virginia, Morgan is going to discover that there was a crossable ford at a place called Buffington Island. Okay, and this is going to allow him and his men to get into that state of Virginia. Okay, unfortunately for Morgan, Burnside knew this time. He sniffed out this plan, okay?
Burnside's actually pretty good here. The Union really are on Morgan's ass in this the whole time.
They want him badly.
They want him fucking gone.
Burnside figured he's probably going to have to cross at Buffington. That's what he's sort of thinking.
You got to wonder if this is Burnside's kind of redemption after Fredericksburg, that he's trying to redeem himself.
He did very well here, okay? Now, Burnside is going to send 10 gunboats under Leroy Fitz, you mentioned, up the Ohio River, as well as some infantry troops under Edward Hobson and Henry Judah, and some cavalry under August Coutts, okay? Now, he's going to be ready for Morgan in Buffington when he gets there, okay? The federal troops aren't going to arrive. This is where it goes wrong. The federal troops aren't going to arrive right away, and the ford was defended by some local guys from Marietta, Ohio. When Morgan got to this ford on the 18th, it was dark, so he halted. Now, this is the great halt for Morgan here, okay? This is going to be bad news for Morgan, because he probably could have got right through right then, but he waited, okay? And guess what happens the next morning, on the early morning of the 19th when he goes to cross? All
Yeah.
those Union guys are there.
Yep.
Scouts and Judah are going to attack Morgan just north of a small town of Portland. Soon those 3,000 Union troops they're all over Morgan's 1,800 or so remaining men. These guys are tired and been raiding for over a month at this point, right? Now, 2 Union gunboats, going to be the U.S. Moose and the USS Allegheny Bell, also
The
begin
moose
firing
sounds
shells.
like something from Canada.
I know, probably shooting maple syrup down. but they're going to begin firing shells at Morgan's guys. Now, Morgan, he was really stuck at this point, really had nowhere to go. Okay, so he has to split his guys up at this point.
Yep.
His brother-in-law, you mentioned, Basil Duke, and his brother John Morgan, they're going to get captured here, along with about 800 of his men. Now, Morgan himself is still kind of on the run at this point, but he was the plum Burnside wanted, was Morgan, right? Well, what was left of his raiders basically headed towards another town, another fort, a place called Belleville.
Yeah.
And about 300 or so of Morgan's men actually made it across the river, right? While Morgan's getting ready to cross the ford, okay, himself, some federal gunboats show up. And so seeing this, he's going to turn around and join his men who are still stuck on the Ohio side of the river instead of going across, okay? Because he sees they're about to be cut off, and he doesn't want to leave his men behind, which is kind of a cool thing if you're a soldier, you see your guys doing this, right? So Morgan at this point, he's kind of screwed. He'll spend the next couple of days trying to find a safe place to cross, and finally on July 26th, Morgan's going to kind of run out of luck here. He'll be about 40 miles southeast of Canton in the town of Salineville.
Yep.
All right. Morgan maybe had about 700 guys left, and they were just about out of gas. They're going to be getting chased by about 2,500 men under the command of a guy named James Shackelford. Ironically, he was from where? Kentucky. Okay.
Yep.
So it all goes back. Now, Shackelford is going to attack Morgan and beat him pretty badly, with the Rebs taking over 350 casualties, which is about 50% of his remaining men he's going to lose, mostly captured, admittedly. The battle's going to go about 2 hours until around 2 p.m. Morgan is going to basically at this point say, no mas. He's going to surrender to a fellow cavalryman of all people, a guy named Major George Rue of the 9th Kentucky, near the town of West Point, Ohio. So they finally got him. But there's some controversy, though, because when he surrendered, the way he did, he surrendered to, I think, a captain instead. Yep. And they tried to make a case that it was not a legal surrender, so he could either be let go, or there was some loophole, but it didn't work. But it didn't work. But suffice it to say, John Hunt Morgan was now a guest of the state of Ohio. Is how it's going to turn itself out, right? A lot of his guys were sent to a place called Camp Morton in Indianapolis, and eventually to a military prison, Camp Douglas, as well as Camp Chase down in Columbus, right? So they're going to get spread out. Now, Morgan and his officers, they didn't go to a military prison. General Burnside, along with Governor Todd, decided Morgan and his officers, 68 total guys, are all going to go to the Ohio Penitentiary instead of a POW camp, figuring the treatment there probably is going to be better, admittedly. Yep. It probably will be, okay?
Yeah, well, prison camps at this time in the Civil War are really starting to become, I mean, they always were brutal places, but this is when it really starts to turn, I think, and there's probably reports getting out there. I mean, there is an officer prison camp that in Ohio he could have been sent to, Johnson's Island, and that's where Isaac Trimble would have been held at this time that Morgan is captured.
I think Island. Governor Todd wanted the celebrity in his jail, not a military jail, probably. That's probably what it was. But
totally,
whatever the hell happens, he's going to go to that jail. He's going to be joined by his brother-in-law, Basil Duke, who was surrendered at Buffington Island. He's going to go there as well. Now, upon the arrival of all 68 guys, including Morgan, they're going to be ordered to take a bath in a large barrel, and their facial hair was all shaved. I don't know what the hell that means, okay? But those had long, well, it's a big barrel, okay? Those
long hair in the Confederacy was considered, that's a symbol of status.
There was a guy named Colonel Smith, who was a rebel officer with a big white beard down to his belt buckle, ZZ Top style. They shaved that off on him, okay? Can you imagine he was too thrilled about that?
That's horrible.
Well, tell me about it, okay? Now, Morgan's cells, just explain the situation. Morgan's cells they were always been placed in their own cells, okay? Now, their wing was 400 feet long and 400 feet wide with a 400-foot ceiling, a 40-foot ceiling, rather, okay? It's a big building. Each cell was 3.5 feet wide and 7 feet long. Okay, so not the biggest cells, but they had their own little cell block.
Yep.
But the guys were used to riding horses across the plains. This must have been hell. Okay, it
Oh
just
yeah.
must have been, right? These guys were screwed with constantly by the guards. Okay, the psychological torture was pretty bad. They were allowed to receive mail, but when they got the mail, you know what the guards did? They took the letters out and resealed them and gave them the empty letters. So they opened the mail as an empty letter. They did that
Oh my
constantly to these guys.
God.
So just imagine people, But it didn't. But so Morgan, it didn't take long for him and his men to say, "We need to get the hell out of here," and try to just
They're gonna
devise an
great
escape
escape
plan.
it.
So they discovered that below the floor was an air vent. Now, a guy named Thomas Hines, we mentioned before. Okay, he's the guy who pretended to be a Union man and gained influence in Indiana
Yeah.
with the Copperheads. He's going to come up with a plan to dig through the floor and escape through an air tunnel. The idea that Hines got this from was from Les Miserables, from Victor Hugo's book that just came out in
Wow.
62. He read the book and said, "Hey, we could try this, okay?" At first, Morgan laughed. He referred to Hines as the Count of Monte Cristo, he called him, when he heard about the plan. But he decided it was better than friggin' here, so why not give it a shot, okay? Just like like a prison escape movie, this is exactly how this goes. Morgan's officers are going to steal knives from the kitchen, okay? And they're going to begin digging through the floors in their cells. This is on November 4th,
God.
1863.
I have the Great
This, okay,
Escape theme song playing in my head right now.
just keep it in your head. Everybody be happy, okay?
Yep.
The concrete was 6 inches thick, okay?
Mm.
And then once you got past that, it was another 6 inches of arched bricks, of layered bricks, okay? So that's how thick this thing was, okay? And they're going with knives. Now, they devised a code to keep the guards away. They had one knock, meant stop digging ASAP, and two, meant start digging again. This process went on for a while, as you can imagine. At some point, they needed a place to hide the dirt because they were in the broken concrete. One guy remembered that in the prison yard, there was an old shovel just sitting there. And this is it's typical, okay? So they came up with a plan where a captain named Jake Bennett, okay, would put on a big long coat, walk near the shovel, and he's going to pretend to trip and fall on it. And while he lands, he's going to slide under his coat. Oops, look what I found.
That
And he
is
walks back.
brilliant.
Okay. But it works. They get the shovel back and they start starting to clean up the mess. Now, once the tunnel to the air duct was cut, it was decided that Morgan and 6 officers are going to make the escape, leaving the others behind. Now, the guys they chose are going to be Morgan, Thomas Hines, a guy named Ralph Sheldon, Sam Taylor, L.D. Hawkersmith, Jacob Bennett, we mentioned with the shovel, and J.S. McGee. Those are going to be the guys who are going to escape, okay? The way this escape is going to go down, it would happen after bedtime when each man was locked in his individual cell. Now, when the time came, each man would climb through the dug floor in that air chamber and put on clothes. They would take clothes and stick them in their bed. So like when your parents looking to see if you're there Friday night, they'd see
Yep.
a big lump on Mary's bed thinking she was there. But
God.
that's
So
what they would
are they
do.
leaving in their feety pajamas?
They probably, I don't know what the hell they're wearing, okay? Well, but they basically make like they're sleeping in there, okay? And so, when you went out for your Labatt's runs on Friday nights, that's how your bed probably looked. But once they got out, what they would do is they'd all separate, except Morgan and Hines would stay together. They would get to a train and they would get to Cincinnati. That was the plan, okay? There was one thing that was still undone. They needed to find a place to scale the wall. Okay, now, so this is big wall. They need to get on top of the wall to see where they can climb down to. They know what the hell's on the other side of the wall. They couldn't figure out a way to do it, and that was the important thing about it. And one of the guys came up with an idea, which is kind of funny. A guy named Captain Samuel Taylor. Okay, he's one of the officers on the Confederates, on Morgan's guys. He was small, but I guess he pretended he was really strong.
Was he 5'4" or 5'2"?
Well, who the hell knows what he was? Probably something like that. But he challenged one of the guards that he was stronger than him. "I'm stronger than you. I'll prove it to you." He goes, "I bet you I can climb up that wall with a rope with one hand." Okay, you no way. Go ahead. So what does he do? He freaking does it. So he climbs up the rope with one hand. He's going to get up there. While he's up there, he's going to look over. He's going to see exactly where the place to land is and come down and tell the guys where to go.
Wow.
That's how they decided where to go.
Awesome.
Right? So it's like, all right, so perfect. Okay. Morgan also found some civilian clothes and a train schedule. It was a place, the Little Miami Railroad, which is a train that passed not far from the jail that took him to Cincinnati. With everything set and ready to go, the plan, they were just about done on November 24th, 1863 for this thing ready. They're almost ready to go. They needed one more little bit of luck. In that prison yard, there were dogs. just dogs, okay? They needed the weather to rain because when it rained, the dogs went in the kennel and they
Yep.
weren't in the yard. And so they were hoping for rain. So luck was on Morgan's side because guess what happens the night of November 27th? It rains, so, and it rains hard. So John Hunt Morgan at this point, this is the night they're going to do it. Okay, they're going to leave his brother Dick Morgan behind. The reason why they did that is because Dick looked a little bit like John and figured if he lied in his bed, they'd see him, they
Yep.
may think it's John. Who the hell knows? But that's probably why they did it. Okay. So each of the 7 escapees they're gonna load their beds full of those dummies made of clothes, and they're gonna crawl through those holes on their floors into the air tunnel. And this was a fight or die situation. Morgan vowed he was never going back to jail again. This is it. I'm never coming back in this place again. All 7 made it through the air tunnels into that prison yard where it rained and the dogs were asleep in the kennels. So far, so good. They made it to the outside wall and used that rope to scale the wall. But the one problem they had though was they had no way to get the rope off the wall when they left. They had to leave it. And so they knew that as soon as daylight came, they were going to see the rope and they were going to be looking for him. So they knew they had to move quick. Captain Hines, we mentioned before, these guys like to leave notes, calling cards, okay? He leaves a middle finger note in his cell to the guards that he knew they would find the next morning when in there, okay? He wrote basically what he wrote was a letter almost in real time what they were doing while you're reading this, here's what we're doing type thing. Okay, so
Wow.
the note says, by order of my 6 honorable Confederates, and he named each of the people I mentioned before, about 1/4 of a mile from the prison at the local train depot of the Little Miami Railroad, Captain Hines and General Morgan purchased their tickets and boarded the train. A Union major offered Captain General Morgan a sip of French brandy as he passed the prison. The Union major alluded to the fact that General Morgan was there for safekeeping. General Morgan replied, I hope they will keep him as safe as he is now. That's what the
Wow.
note said. Okay,
God, this needs to be a movie.
so it's just that the whole thing plays like that, right? Now, Morgans and Hines, they did get on the train, and as a coach here likes to say, they were on to Cincinnati. Okay,
Yep.
that's what they were doing. Okay, once they got near Dayton, though, something happened, and it made them nervous. The train started to slow down. They didn't know why. Okay, so what they're going to do is they're going to get to a place called Ludlow Ferry, which is on the Ohio River. And as the train slows, the two are literally going to jump off the train, and they're going to jump a
Yep.
moving train. Okay, and they're going to find a local. They're going to pay a local to take them across the river in a small boat. Now they're going to end up at the home of a place named Mrs. Ludlow, and they were served coffee and they were happy to be out of Ohio. I mean, I know the feeling. Morgan and Hines, they're going to stop a few times south. They're going to make it all the way to Dalton, Georgia. Okay, and out of the 7 escapees, 5 got away. Only 2 got caught.
Yep.
Okay. And what's funny is when the news of his escape got out, his legend just exploded.
Yeah.
He went from, he turned into Elvis at this point.
Yeah.
Because the story of how he got out got around. One guy who didn't share in the joy was Braxton Bragg, okay, who was pissed off.
Because he's like, what is he doing there?
Well, he's mad that he disobeyed the direct orders by crossing the Ohio
why
River.
is he in Ohio?
Now, here's the thing, though. By the time this happens, Bragg, guess what he's doing? He's now part of the War Department in Richmond because he wasn't with them anymore.
He's done. Yeah, because
right?
You have to remember this whole time, Chickamauga's happened, Chattanooga's happened. Bragg is done leading the Army of Tennessee.
Right, and so he's pissed off, but he can't do anything about it. He's
No.
just going to grumble and say, well, screw him, right? Now, the impact of this, we'll just put a thing on the raid real quick before we go on to the next phase of this, but the impact of this raid was unbelievable. I mean, he's going to go on and capture and parole about 6,000 Union soldiers. Yep. He's going to destroy 34 bridges. He's going to steal thousands of dollars in cash and supplies. He'll disrupt railroads. He's going to spread absolute fear and mayhem throughout Indiana and Ohio. He's going to divert over 10,000 Union soldiers, like we said, that all the while that Vicksburg and Gettysburg are going on. He achieved every goal he set for himself by doing this. Just in Ohio alone, he stole 2,500 horses, destroyed 600,000 in property. The only group that caused more damage in Ohio, was the Chicago Cubs. If you think about it.
Hey,
right? That's the reality how it was. Now, his raid does get overblown. Yeah, I know. But many feel it slowed the fall of Eastern Tennessee and prevented William Rosecrans from being reinforced. The Battle of Chickamauga. So there's all these little. I mean, who knows? It does kind of take on its cult of personality of its own.
Yeah.
but needless to say, I mean, he was somebody who, he was someone who did a lot of things. Now, he did some things later. There was the Battle of Cynthiana he did. We're not going to get
Yeah.
into too much of that, right?
The one thing I do want to say though regarding his raid is from the Union perspective, you have Burnside who is clearly prepared. This is the thing.
Mhm.
The Union is fighting back. They've heard of Morgan. They know who he is. They gave Morgan a run for his money in some ways because they're prepared. They
Mhm.
know he's there. They're trying to predict where he's going. So I think in some way, like, they need to get some credit too because they fought back and they
Well, they
knew
caught
how.
him.
Yeah,
They caught
they were
him.
the ones that caught him, and
Yeah.
in some ways because of that, the raid that Morgan did could have been doomed from the beginning because he's riding off that arrogance of that first raid. Right, or that initial raid in 1862. He's riding off that, like, well, it went well here, so presumably I can do something more. And that's where it starts to break off from the March to the Sea. Sherman does his Meridian campaign. It goes relatively well. And he says to Grant in 1864, well, we did it for Meridian. Can we try it on a larger scale? And it goes really well. There's a lot of
Mhm.
similarities between Morgan and Sherman in what they do.
All right.
But it really starts to break away with Morgan's big raid and Sherman's March to the Sea. The March to the Sea is they're two different things, but still, they're doing very similar things as well.
Well, there's no doubt, and so he does do that smaller raid that results in the Battle of Cynthiana we talked about. But at this point in the rebel army, Robert E. Lee and the brass, they've had it up to here with Morgan. He's for one, he's way too popular. He's
Yeah.
way too much of a loose
Oh, I
cannon.
can't
He doesn't
imagine Jeb
follow
likes him
orders.
very much.
I mean, and you know how you handle a troublesome employee, Mary? You promote him. And
Yeah.
guess what? That's what they did. Okay,
And you
it's
give
kind of
him
like
a
when you
desk job.
well, it's how you earn your Blizzard machine gig after you blew that deal at the drive-through. Same deal.
Well, that's
That's how you
true,
got it,
right?
right?
Yeah. No, I like the Blizzard
So,
machine way better. It's a lot better than drive through.
definitely.
It'll deal with people.
So Morgan gets quotation fingers promoted to command of the Department of Eastern Tennessee and Southwestern Virginia. Now, it's important that he gets this in a second. So his ass is chained to a desk in the town of Abington, Virginia. Okay, he basically spends his time again playing cards and drinking. Many of his former horsemen have all deserted. I mean, he's just sitting there, right? By late of 1864, though, the rebel army started to get stretched thin. Now, Vicksburg was gone.
Yep.
Sherman was setting campfires in Atlanta at this point. Okay, Richmond was under siege. Morgan learned that the military governor of Tennessee, Andrew Johnson of all people, how about
Yep.
that, Mary? That's who that was. Okay,
Wow.
he's sending a Union force to his Johnson's hometown of Greenville, Tennessee. Okay, by happenstance, Greenville, Tennessee falls under Morgan's jurisdiction of Tennessee, Eastern Tennessee, and Southwestern Virginia. So he feels he has the right now to get the old band back together again and go riding down there. So Morgan saw this as his chance to get down there. So he assembles a force while still in Virginia. And on September 3rd, he's going to head to Greenville to try to surprise the feds. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So he's like, I got this. Morgan's going to ride into Greenville with 1,500 guys. And where he was, he was basically, when he got there, he was welcomed by the locals, and he was told the feds are about 20 miles away. Okay, so he knew they were there. But then Morgan, he says, and I quote, "They don't know I am here with the full division, and they are in for a big surprise." So he's going to go get him, right? He's going to stay at a mansion owned by a Secesh woman by the name of Catherine Williams. Okay, she had two sons fighting in the Confederate Army. And this picture, this big house, this big fancy place. Morgan again is a rock star. This is Elvis. Okay, this is like Elvis coming over for dinner type thing. Okay,
Yep.
so she's gonna prepare a big, huge, grand dinner for him. Okay, after dinner, okay, Morgan's gonna hang around the town. He's gonna be enjoying his celebrity status. He's riding around to check on his division. All this while with the understanding that the federal troops are about 20 miles away at a place called Bull's Gap, and they don't know he's there. And he's right to a point, okay? Morgan eventually is going to return to that mansion again, the Williams Mansion, where he's entertaining the ladies of the town with stories of he's being toasted with Tennessee whiskey. You can only imagine how this whole thing's going,
Wow.
right? Now here's how life gets you though, okay? While he's doing this, his men are being dicks to the locals. Okay. They hassle a local teenager, one of Morgan's guys, who is pissed off because one of his Morgan's guys stole a bag of flour from him. So what does the kid do? He rides over to Bull's Gap to tell the Union commander, a guy named Alvin Gillum, hey, I don't know if you know this, but there's a whole shit ton of Rebs over here in Greenville. And he did that because he stole a flower. So he goes to rat them out for it,
Oh my
okay?
God.
Typical, it's funny what gets you, right? So, but it's dark and it's rainy. But Gillum, he says, okay, well, I'm gonna send about 500 men towards Greenville using the back roads to go check this out. I'm gonna send guys over there. Now, back at the Williams Mansion, the party's rolling on with Morgan continuing to drink and tell his stories. All the locals who hung on every word he said. And you just see how this thing's going. Finally, around midnight, which I imagine was probably a full call me maybe situation at that point, right? Morgan's going to call it a night and he's going to go to bed, okay?
In his feety pajamas.
He's going to put on his feety pajamas and he's going to sleep in an upstairs room, okay? Now, while he's sleeping, the Union men are going to be advancing through the mud in that pouring rain towards Greenville. Now, right around dawn, another local guy, he's going to ride into the approaching line with news that John Hunt Morgan and 1,500 raiders are positioned around the town, and they're be careful, you're going into a trap here. This is Morgan's guys. And then he had more important news. Oh, by the way, Morgan's in that house. He's like, oh, okay. So Gillum hearing the news, they're hearing everything about this guy. I mean, he's unbelievable. He's a big superstar in the South. Gillum, he hears the news that Morgan's raiders are out there in this cult of personality, and he knows he's got a chance to bag him. And this is his claim to fame.
Yep.
He's going to send 2 cavalry companies forward under Captain C.C. Wilcox and S.E. Northington. They go by their middle initials, Mary, okay, into the town to try to capture Morgan and bring him out dead or alive. They go get him, okay? About this time, the last thing Morgan's men on picket duty expected was to run into Union troops. I mean, it's rainy. They don't think they're there. Many are sleeping. They're trying to stay dry in the rain. The Union troopers are basically going to walk right into them and capture half of them. A lot of them are sleeping, okay? There is going to be some shots fired back and forth, okay? Enough to wake up Morgan back in the house. He's going to wake up hearing gunshots in the distance. He's going to jump up after hearing these shots. He'll jump out of bed. All he's wearing is a nightshirt and slippers. That's all he's wearing, okay? Maybe one of those ones that's open in the back, you have to tie. Who knows? But that's what he's wearing,
God.
Okay? Mrs. Williams, the lady of the house, she hears it too, and she wakes up and she yells to Morgan, they are everywhere. Oh, they're onto you, General. Hide quick, okay? All of Morgan's officers are outside, and most of them are already captured. Williams pointed towards a place called the St. James Episcopal Church. Next door is a place for Morgan to go hide. So he goes, go hide in the basement and, just go out there and go hide in the church basement. That's the place to go. Now, once inside, okay, the Union troops enter the building. He hears the footsteps right above him. So he's like, this is not good. So he's going to stay in there. He realizes he can't. So he sneaks out into Mrs. Williams' garden, which is next to the house. And he's sneaking. Just picture him here. He's got an overcoat on, but he's got his jammies and he's got the slippers on. Okay. Now, there he's going to find one of his aides, a guy, Captain Rogers. Okay. And he tells Morgan, hey, General, we're surrounded. There is no chance of our escaping. Morgan's is thinking back to his Ohio jail experience. He's going to say he has no desire. He says to Rogers, the Yankees will never take me prisoner again. Okay. Morgan tries to sneak out. And once he's in the garden, some Union guy yells, I see him. There he goes. Okay. So a man on horse is going to ride up to him. He's going to gallop up. He's wearing a brown jacket instead of a Union uniform. So Morgan and Rogers take him for a Confederate. Okay. Well, it was not a rebel. Okay. Guess who it was? Andrew Campbell. Remember him?
Yep.
That's the guy. He orders them to surrender. So this is like an action movie. Okay. Andrew Campbell, he was that rebel at the wedding who grumbled about the cake and the whiskey. Okay. He was a guy who basically said, if I ever meet Morgan, I will salute him or by God shake his hand. Okay. Campbell, since that night, he deserted and joined the Union Army.
Oh my God.
Okay. And he kept the brown jacket he used as a Reb because he liked the jacket. Campbell's going to raise his pistol and demand his surrender. Rogers, yep, you got me, you know. Morgan says no, and he turns to run, okay? And Campbell yells, stop. And when he didn't, he fires a single shot, cuts Morgan right in the spine. Morgan fell face first in the mud. His last words were, oh God, oh God. Okay. Now, it's debated whether or not Campbell knew he had shot Morgan, or
Yep.
he was just some random guy. But you can't deny the irony of Campbell being the guy
Yeah.
who shot him.
Yeah. Well, it's the same as Jeb Stuart, right? Like John Huff knowing who shot Jeb Stuart.
Well, just right, but just going back to the
Yeah.
beginning when
That
he was at the
story. Yeah.
wedding. That it's just funny how it
Yeah.
is. Now, Morgan's going to die basically instantly. You know, when all he's going to have on in his body is he's going to have the slippers, the pajama nightshirt, and
Mhm.
the jacket. That he's going to be shot in the back wearing his pajamas.
Wow.
Unfortunately, that's the reality. Okay.
Wow.
Morgan's going to die pretty much instantly, and a crowd is going to gather around the body. Captain Wilcox is going to basically order one of Morgan's captured staff, a guy named Captain Henry Clay, the son of the Henry Clay.
Wow.
There you go,
Yep.
more connections, to turn Morgan's body over. Seeing who it was, Clay says to Wilcox, "You have just killed the best man in the Confederacy." Okay. The Union men, now realizing that they've killed the famous John Hunt Morgan, they cheered as his body was put on a horse and led through the lines back to Williams' mansion. Okay, they put him on a
Wow.
horse and laid him out. And there, Mrs. Williams, I mean, she was absolutely heartbroken. She cleaned up the body. She put his body in like a spotless Confederate uniform. You know, the Union guys, to their credit, when they moved the body out again, they set up an honor guard and they raised their sabers to him on their way out. And they returned the body to Abington, where a now pregnant wife, Maddie, is waiting for him.
Oh.
Okay. Now, Andrew Campbell, okay, the man who shot him, was promoted to sergeant and then lieutenant for his actions. Okay. When William T. Sherman, you've heard of him,
Yep.
heard of Morgan's death, he responded one word. You know what he said? Good. That's what he said.
Wow, that's so
You know,
Jesus.
but, you know,
Good.
but as you can imagine, in the South was devastated by this,
Yeah.
right? I mean, they rose him to an almost immortal level. When they heard he was shot in the back, they were outraged. Okay, rumors in the South that he was naked and dragged through the mud. I mean, it was all false, but they all made the rounds.
Yeah.
I mean, they just got him going. Morgan's body eventually is going to be taken to Richmond, where it's going to be laid out in the Confederate House of Representatives, and then sent to Lexington, Kentucky for his burial. Now, John Hunt Morgan's legacy really has grown from there, believe it or not.
Yep.
In part due to that lost cause movement, unfortunately, right? In 1888, Morgan's daughter, Johnny, okay, the last known descendant, she's going to pass away. You know, Maddie had died the previous year. And, you know, the story proved to be wrong. It was there because it was discovered, you kind of hinted at it earlier, that he did father a child from a slave.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is Garrett Augustus Morgan, right? Now, it's ironic that, you know, this Garrett would have been probably half black, half white, realistically, right? Mm-hmm. This Garrett, the son of a rebel commander, he's going to be an early leader of the NAACP.
Yeah, he is.
Right? He's believed to be the first African American man to own a car.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how the hell they would know
that.
Garrett goes on to be a scientist, and he's credited for inventing the smoke mask that saved millions of firemen's lives. You know, he's also the man, believe it or not, for inventing the 3-color traffic light.
Yep.
Okay. Ironically, guess who invented that? In Cleveland.
Oh my God.
Okay. But so the legacy of John Hunt Morgan is something that you could not write this story. If you made a movie about his life, about his upbringing, his raid, his escape, his death, you wouldn't believe it. But it's all 100% true. This is a guy who lived the absolute life of a cavalier.
Yep.
And it's kind of ironic that that his son would have put the yellow and the red and the green light thing. Because I think his life probably wouldn't have had the red based on his history.
Oh,
you know,
yeah, no shit. God.
You know, but he's a fascinating study.
He is.
And as we look at the Cavaliers, we've talked about Jeb Stuart and the War Child, Wheeler, and those guys.
Kilpatrick.
Morgan's the top. Kilpatrick. This guy's the top of the list because he embraced his role, he did his job, but he did it in a way where he was still maintain that sort of quasi chivalrous attitude of
the
heroic his Union guys.
The Southern gentleman, he doesn't have that. He's not the diva that Jeb Stuart was. I mean, Jeb Stuart, I mean, sorry, Jeb Stuart fans, he's a diva. He's got that feather in his hat. I don't know. There's something very different about Morgan where he's just this one that I think the people of the South could relate to a lot more than they could Jeb
Mhm.
Stuart.
Well, he was someone. He was one of them. I mean,
Yeah.
he didn't come from aristocracy. He was a guy who just he did come from money, primarily from his
Yeah,
grandparents from John Wilkes,
and
Oregon.
his mother helped him out, but he's like he's a hemp farmer and fortunately he's also a slave trader, which is horrible, but you know,
Oh, we're not going to
and
wax poetic and make the guy to
no.
the greatest thing. Well, all we're saying is this is a guy who he knew he was famous. He embraced it to a point, but I don't want to say he didn't let it get to his head because of course it did. But I look at the way he treated his men and treated the captured men of how he did it.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that he was almost like a villain in a Batman movie. He told you what he was going to do. He did it. And then when he did, he left his calling card. He gave you the finger on the way out. And he laughed as he did it.
Yeah.
It was a big game to him. And that's how he did it. He
Yeah.
looked at it as a big game. He died the way he lived. There's
He
no
did.
question he did. It's kind of a shame he got caught killed in his PJs and his
I
feet in
know.
pajamas.
I know.
Ironically, by a guy who deserted the Confederacy, who guarded his wedding for him.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things. There are few people in the Civil War or any war, but especially the Civil War, who are more colorful than John Hunt Morgan.
Oh, he's very
And
colorful.
and if you want to study somebody and you shake your head at just the balls, study him.
Yeah.
Study him because he's somebody that a lot of people I think could really appreciate and relate to in context of this war compared to some of the other ones like the Nathan Bedford Forrest of the world who are definitely on the darker side of this stuff.
Oh,
And he's
definitely.
the and Morgan's somebody I think a lot of people can read and just
Yeah.
enjoy. So I enjoy studying him. He's always been one of my favorites. There's no question. I've always
Oh,
enjoyed John L. Morgan.
I enjoyed it too. And going into this, I didn't know a lot about Morgan, but I instantly started to see a lot of parallels with Sherman with the Meridian campaign. You know, Morgan's initial 1862 raid is very much like Sherman's Meridian campaign. That's how Sherman gets ready for the March to the Sea. You know, it's kind of a small scale thing. And then you have them doing their bigger thing. But that's when they kind of diverge away from each other. Sherman's March to the Sea is very successful, you know, with what he wants to do with it. Morgan's big raid, not as much, right? Because the Union knows who he is. They're prepared for him. But, you know, there's a lot of parallels, I thought. And I didn't think that going into it. I didn't think I would find a lot of parallels with a cavalry guy like John Hunt Morgan and General William T. Sherman on the Union side. But
One
I
guy's
did.
from Ohio. One guy tormented Ohio.
Exactly. Yeah, no, there is that
So
too. But I did see that in how they were doing things. And you got to wonder if somehow one was inspired. Like, I don't know if one was somehow reading what the other was doing and thinking, let's do this and try it. If they were reading the papers and doing that, or if they're doing it parallel to each other without knowing what the other was doing.
it's tough. It's tough to say.
Yeah.
It's tough to say. But he certainly suffice it to say, John Hunt Morgan is a colorful character and one I think a lot of people can definitely enjoy. So I think we can drop him off there.
I
I
think
think
so.
we've done him some justice today. He's
Yep.
somebody who I don't think people know who he is. I don't think a lot of people really get into him. You think Southern Cavalry, of course. You think Stewart. You think Forrest. You think guys like that. But in my book, Morgan's the top of the list because he's just somebody
Yeah.
who just exudes balls.
He
just-
does. He
just-
does.
I mean,
He's like, what else
he
can
just
I do?
does.
I did
He
this
just
before.
does.
What can I do to make
And you know what
that
else
much
he
better?
does? He spikes the ball, and that's what's
He
great
does.
too. Is he spikes the ball,
Yep.
and he has a lot of fun doing it. It was just a big game to him.
Yep.
So, anyway, so what's coming up for us? What's next for us?
So next we are doing Tullahoma, probably a couple episodes in Tullahoma. Our book club, we will be hopefully announcing the date for that soon. That is Kent Masterson's Brown Meet at Gettysburg is our next book that we're reading. So hopefully we will be announcing the date for that soon. There's Funkle Mary again for our YouTube watchers. But yeah, and we will be doing a Facebook Live for this episode. Obviously not on Saturday. So if you're listening on Saturday, no Facebook Live. We will be doing it early in the week. So probably Monday night at 7:00. We will be doing a
Monday, right?
Facebook Live.
I was told Monday.
I just said Monday.
You said it's early in the week.
I said probably Monday night.
Guess I do as I'm told.
Yep.
Anyway, so that'll be fun. So
probably Monday night, just in case something happens and one of us can't. So,
oh, I know. We'll be okay. Monday sounds like a great night.
Monday night will be our next Facebook Live. So anyway, thank you everybody for listening to episode 87. Thank you to you, Darren, for being the awesome host that you are and person to work with on this. You are the best.
We have to remember the team, Mary. You know that is. Me and old Funko Mary hold it together over here. It's all that matters. Yeah. So we'll look forward to look forward to doing Tullahoma next week, Mary. We look forward to doing that.
Yeah, and your post-Canadian adventures.
Canada, it's coming next week. Yep. International Man of Mystery. So I'm sure we'll have plenty of fun stories to talk about that. Yeah, so any final words from you, Fincheru, as we head off into the great wild blue yonder?
As I said, thank you to everybody. Thank you to you for being awesome. And we are going to be in Canada. Well, obviously, I'm going to be in Canada. Darren's coming up to see me in Canada this weekend. So stay tuned for our adventures on our podcast accounts on social medias for that.
We'll have a lot of fun with that. So anyway, thanks for listening. We appreciate it. We look forward to talking to you all. Mary, we will talk to you soon. Everybody have a great weekend. Hope it's cool where you are. Hopefully the weather is nice. You're enjoying some good summer weather finally after this winter we all just had. So off we go. Thank you for listening. We appreciate it. As we like to say, Mary, the pleasure as always was all yours. And we are off and we will see you on the other side.
Bye guys. See ya.
Peace out.